This week you'll be learning about natural selection. Before we even get into the module, I want to do a really quick lesson about the main ideas so that you understand what you're learning. I will have this PowerPoint or Google slide attached to the module on the right underneath this video. So natural selection is an idea that was put out by Charles Darwin based on his observations when he went on this voyage on this ship called the Beagle in the 1800s. Here are the main ideas that you can go back to. Natural selection affects populations, not individuals. So when you talk about something evolving, you talk about a population evolving, you never say an individual evolves. It starts with the idea that all populations have genetic variation among the individuals. If everything is the same, you can't select. So you have to have variation, and it has to be variation that can be passed through DNA. Genetic variations are caused by mutations, but they're also caused by regular sexual reproduction, the crossing over and independent assortment and meiosis, and random fertilization. And if it's genetic variation, it's passed on through DNA from generation to generation. A genetic variation is not good or bad on its own. The environment selects whether or not something is a better or worse variation. So if you have white fur and you're in a dark forest, that's not a good variation. If you have white fur and you're in the Arctic or snow, that's a good variation. So the environment chooses. Selective pressures are going to change the environment. Selective pressures are things like competition among the members of the population. So, which cheetah is faster because they might be competing with each other. There's predators that they're trying to get away from. There's the amount of food available, so who's a better hunter. There's a limited number of mates. So even if you're surviving, if you don't have the chance to pass on your traits, you wouldn't be considered fit. For insects, pesticides would be a selective pressure. For plants, herbicides would be a selective pressure. For bacteria, antibiotics would be a selective pressure. So these pressures are going to determine which variation is the best. The term fitness for biology, or we call it biological fitness, this means which members of the population produce the most offspring. It has nothing to do with who's the strongest or who's the fastest. If you have the most babies, you are the most fit because you have passed on your DNA the most. Organisms, so the word we're going to use a bunch in evolution is adaptation. So organisms with the best variation are considered to have an adaptation. They will survive and reproduce more often in their environment than any other organism that has just the other variation. So if you look at an environment and 90% of the mice are white and 10% are black, then you would say, or lighter mice, you would say the lighter mouse is is the adaptation in that environment. If you go to a different one and 90% are dark and 10% are light, you'd say in that environment, the dark was the adaptation. So the adaptation depends on the environment, and it's which, who has the most that's getting passed on to. This was a terrible sentence. So the adaptation is the variation that's shown up the most in the offspring, and it gets passed on to future generations. So over time, the population is going to change to have more individuals in it with the adaptation than the other variations. This is because the ones with the best genetic variation survive and pass them on to their offspring. Individuals without the genetic variation die. So you can't choose to have an adaptation. You either have the adaptation and you survive and reproduce, or you don't have the adaptation and you die. So evolution is the change in allele frequency in a population over time. Alleles are your options for your traits or the phenotypes, things that show up. So blue eyes and brown eyes would be different alleles. Curly hair, dark, straight hair. Skin color could be different alleles. Frequency is how often it's found in a population. Allele frequency is how often a version of a trait is found in the population. So just going over these vocab words, population is all the organisms of a single species that live in the same area at the same time. Genetic variation is these differences among a population in the DNA that can get passed on. A selective pressure is what's going to change the environment. If there's no pressure, it doesn't change. So in here, I have a whole bunch of bacteria. So in your body, you have a bunch of bacteria. But if you're not taking an antibiotic, then being antibiotic resistant isn't an adaptation. It's just a variation. If you start to take an antibiotic, then the bacteria that are resistant to the antibiotic, they have the adaptation, they'll survive, and over time, they will reproduce more quickly and have more offspring than the ones that don't. And over long periods of time, the population changes to have more organisms that have the adaptation than don't. Okay, so selective pressures change the population over time. It doesn't change a single individual ever. Biological fitness is, again, the idea of this organism would be more fit than this organism because it has more offspring. Okay, so it's getting to pass on its DNA. The whole idea with evolution is who gets to pass on their DNA the most. And the ones that pass on their most and have those traits down into future generations, they're considered more fit biologically. Again, an adaptation is a variation that's best suited for that environment. So in water, having webbed feet for a duck is a great adaptation. But if you are a bird on land, then that would not be. This would be a better adaptation for walking. Or if you are a bird that needs to catch your prey while you're flying, then having these claws here would be a better adaptation. These different bills here, these different beaks, their shapes of them allow them to eat different things. And they have good adaptations for what they're trying to eat. The best adaptation for an organism allows it to access food or habitat that other things that makes it has less competition. So if these birds have this short beak and get insects, they won't have to compete with these birds that are cracking seeds. The idea of natural selection is that the environment is selecting what's the best adaptation. So over here, this thing, we'll say it's asexual reproduction, but there's multiple offspring and there's mutations. Mutations create different variations. This is not a good mutation. It dies out. This one, is going here. Here's the offspring, but eventually this dies out. And over time, through reproduction, I end up with this trait over and over. So we consider this trait to be the adaptation. So natural selection is considered the driving force of evolution. And these populations change over time because the individual with the best adaptation or best variation survive and reproduce at a higher rate than the individuals that don't have it. So those are the main ideas that I need for you to get out of this. And I will have this Google slideshow available for you so you can go back to it. So when you're in your module, you have a warm-up quiz here that you're going to take. It's no points, but it's a good way to test your knowledge, though you needed some of that knowledge from the slideshow I just gave you to be able to take it. So you're going to take this little quiz. Then the next thing you're going to do this page has a whole bunch of resources. There's a lot of videos. I do want you to look at them. These two videos teach you about variations. This is a reading about variations. These two videos teach you about natural selection. And here's a reading about natural selection. And here is a TED Talk about the science of skin color. So for your activity that's graded this week, you are going to be watching a video and filling out an activity guide that goes directly with the video. So you need to watch the video. So here is the video. It's called The Biology of Skin Color. You're going to watch this. If you want to see the words written down so that you can kind of go back to it, there's transcripts. And then you're going to open up this assignment, which I have opened up over here. So this assignment, really it's basically a video guide. So it takes you through at different times what you're learning about the biology of skin color. So watch the video and fill out this assignment and make sure you go back and hit submit. Then you have a check for understanding. This one's for no points. It's like a practice quiz to take. And then this one is for points. So you get to take this one 2 times. and that is the end of the work. I know there's a whole bunch of videos and readings, but I really want to make sure that you do spend some time on it because natural selection is one of the most important ideas in biology.